Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum assalam.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walaha ma ba'd. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that there are two things in this world that make life beautiful to live. Allah tells us there are two things that sweeten life. Does anybody know what those two things are mentioned in the Quran? Two things explicitly mentioned in the Quran that Allah says makes life sweet. Muslim or non-Muslim, believer, non-believer. Two things makes life sweet. What are they? Hufad, where are you? Yes. Al-malu wal-banun zinatul hayatid dunya. Al-malu wal-banun. Children and money make life sweet. Make life beautiful. Al-malu wal-banun zinatul hayatid dunya. There are two things that bring comfort and joy to every normal human being. Every normal, sane person. Two things makes your heart comfortable and beautiful. Children and wealth. Today's talk will be about children because with blessing also comes responsibility. With blessing comes responsibility. Allah has blessed us with children. And with that blessing also comes the responsibility that we will be asked about our children. And there's no question that raising children is a very, very difficult aspect. It is a part and parcel of being human. It is something we all do together. So in today's talk, and time is always limited, I wanted to share with you 7 rules for raising successful children. Are you guys ready? Well, if you're ready, you need to start taking notes. Be ready. How is this ready? You're not going to memorize these rules off the top of your head. I'm going to give you 7 rules for successful raising of children. Okay? Before I begin, personal story, anecdote, and today's lecture has quite a few of those personal stories. When I was a new student in Medina, I'd come home for the summers, and I was newly married. I didn't have any children. My second, third year, I didn't have any children. And the elders came to me, the uncles of the community came, and they said, "Look, you're studying in Medina, give us a lecture about how to raise kids." I didn't have any kids at the time. They thought because I had access to books, I could give a good lecture about raising children. So I said, inshallah, next year I come, I'll give a lecture about raising children. So that year that I was in Medina, that middle year that I was there between the 2 summers, I went and tried to find books of tafsir that mention children raising, how we raise children. The books of fiqh, where do they mention raising children, right? The books of theology, because if you look at the books of theology or the books of fiqh, you find pages and pages of so many things. I mean, how to do wudu, what breaks wudu, how to face the qibla, how do you find the qibla? You find so much. So I naively thought, as an undergraduate freshman, I naively thought that there's going to be volumes and volumes about how to raise children in our books of legal school and theology and tafsir. Surely, when Allah teaches us how to eat and drink and the adab of eating and drinking, there must be volumes about how to raise kids. And I asked and I researched, and hardly anything in our books of legal, of legal rulings and stuff. Hardly anything. And this was before I had kids. Then Allah blessed me with my first and then second and third and fourth. I had 3 kids in Medina and then 1 when I returned to America. And that's when I realized what I'm about to tell you. These are the 7 rules, okay? First rule, you guys writing down? The first rule, there are no rules. Anyone who tells you, I'm going to give you successful rules for parenting kids is deluded or ignorant. Or is a con artist. One of the 3. There are no rules. Raising children is an art, not a science. You cannot plug and chug the equation. You cannot just do a set of concrete things and then expect to have the result as science does. No, it doesn't work that way. And therefore, in Allah's wisdom, He did not send down a massive series of rules. It is true to say, you will find more in books of our legal schools about what breaks wudu than about how to raise kids. And there's wisdom in that. Because raising children is a case-by-case basis. Raising children is a full-time job where you learn your skills on the job. It is constant training. No one can teach you how to raise children by writing a book. No one can give you a lecture and say, here are the 7 rules of successfully raising children. There is no such thing. It's an on-the-job, constant learning experience. You have to be hands-on. You get your training day in and day out. And it is a case-by-case basis. A famous Harvard psychologist who was actually he's been on the New York Times bestseller list for his books on child psychology. He famously once quipped, as a semi-joke and semi-seriously, he famously quipped that when I was doing my PhD at Harvard, I didn't have any kids. I had 7 theories about how to raise children. Then God blessed me with 7 kids. Now I have 0 theories. And again, there's an element of truth in this quibble, in this pun, in this joke. Again, I have 4 children. What worked for the first didn't work for the second. What worked for the first and second did not work for the third. What worked for none of the 3 worked for the 4th one. And what works in one time and place won't work in another. What works in one society is not going to work in another. What works in one family will not work in another. You can't be taught rules. Raising children is an art, not a science. So, you have to approach it with a different mindset. Sure, inquire, be inquisitive, sure, but realize there is no hard and fast solution. No one can tell you definitively that this particular thing is the right thing to do. You have to do trial and error, case-by-case basis, and hey, like everything in this world, sometimes you're going to be right, and sometimes you're going to be wrong. It's a part of life. It's a part of life, and it is an ongoing process that we learn, and that is why the Quran and Sunnah does not have detailed, explicit rules about raising children, because that is simply not possible. Allah gave us the parenting skills, being human beings, that's all. And then there's generic guidelines, not rules. So these aren't 7 rules, these are 7 points of advice, okay? So change the list from 7 rules, scratch out the rules, and say 7 points of advice. And the first one, there are no rules. That is actually the first one. The second point of advice, and this is something that is generic for anything that you're about to do, anything. Not just raising children, anything you want to do. Our Quran, our Sunnah tells us 3 things you should do. For any field that you want to get involved with, 3 things. Number 1, have a pure intention for the sake of Allah. Number 2, study that field, have the knowledge, ilm. And number 3, act upon it, amal. Niyya, ilm, amal. These are the 3 things that are necessary for the success of any project. Have the niyya, I want to do something. You want to be an architect, it has to be in your heart. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. You're not going to be an architect if you don't have the niyya. Then you got to study. Then you have to act upon that knowledge and get the experience. It's common sense, right? I mean, it's common sense, logical. That's the whole Quran and Sunnah. The first revelation that came down was Iqra. And what is Iqra? Iqra is all about knowledge. Iqra وَرَبُّكَ الْأَكْرَمُ الَّذِي عَلَّمَ بِالْقَلَمِ عَلَّمَ الْإِنسَانَ مَا لَمْ يَعْلَمْ. The first revelation is about knowledge. You better know your stuff. Of course, niyyah is already there because Allah is appointing him to be the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Allah is saying, you have to learn. You have to have ilm. And Allah says, don't worry, I will teach you, right? اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. I will teach you, Ya Rasulullah, what you need to know. Allah will teach you directly. That's the first revelation. What's the second revelation? Who can tell me? Second revelation, what is it? Come on, you know. What's the second revelation? There's got to be one person here that knows.
I know the English.
You know the English. You know the English. I need the Arabic. Come on, there has to be one person here.
يا أيها المزمل
يا أيها المدثر قم فأنذر وربك فكبر وثيابك فطهر والرجز فأهجر. That second revelation is all about action. Oh, you who's wrapped up in a cloak, stand up. Don't be in your safety blanket. Get out of that safety blanket. Stand up and warn the people. And your Lord, praise Him. And your clothes, clean them. And idols, abandon them. On and on and on. Good manners, everything is there. The second revelation is all about what? What is it? Action. So the first revelation, knowledge. The second revelation, action. Right? And niyyah is already there because as for the process. For the rest of us, we begin with niyyah. Now, what have these 3 things got to do with our topic? Very easy. Parents. If you don't have the niyyah to raise your children properly, how will you ever raise them properly? If it's not even on your radar, if it's not even on your agenda to raise your children properly, how will you ever raise them properly? And I'm really and truly surprised by so many parents They are conscious that they're responsible for feeding their kids, making sure they go to bed on time, monitoring the iPad and the iPhone and everything. They're responsible that I need to go to work and pay for their education. But it never occurs to them, I need to teach them manners. I need to teach them theology. I need to teach them the purpose of life. I need to teach them their religion. I mean, don't you think, and I say this even to non-Muslim parents, like even to those that don't have any faith, don't you want your children to be well-behaved, well-mannered, positive contribution to society? If it's just feeding the kid and raising the kid, well then what's the difference between that and an animal or a pet? A child, a human being, is going to be someone who is productive, useful, give back. And oh parents, you are responsible for this. And we can bring in, of course, the religious aspect. Our Prophet ﷺ said, every one of you is a shepherd, and every one of you is responsible for his or her flock. And so, the father is the shepherd for his family, and the mother is a shepherd for her family. And then the hadith goes on, and each one is a shepherd. By the way, it's interesting, the family, both are shepherds. Each one has a different mechanism of protecting the flock. But each one of them, the Prophet ﷺ said, each one is responsible for the family. Both the father and the mother are shepherds for their families. And Allah will ask them about their flock. On Judgment Day, Allah will ask you, did you take care of the flock responsibly? Did you protect them? What does a shepherd do, by the way? What does a shepherd do? A shepherd guides to the right place. A shepherd protects from harm. A shepherd ensures nothing harms, the responsibility. A shepherd makes sure that the food that they're eating is literally good food. The shepherd will not lead the flock to something that is filthy. How then can a father give haram food to his own flock? A'udhu billah, a'udhu billah. How can a father feed his children with that which is filthy? Allah will ask on Judgment Day, you're responsible for these children, and you fed them filthy? Haram, meaning by filthy here, I mean that which is haram to earn, right? A shepherd protects the flock from that which is going to harm the flock. How about parents? They don't care what their children are watching or doing or their friends and whatnot. A shepherd is going to be asked. You allowed wolves to come and harm this flock. You allowed some things to come and harm these innocent children. So we can bring in the religion, and we have to bring in the religion. But the point is, intention, then knowledge, and then acting upon that. As for knowledge of raising children, as I said, it is an art, not a science. It's a continuous learning process. Ask, observe, read some generic books, test and try, ask your family and friends, but you have to be open-minded, you have to take an active interest. And then implement. Knowledge is followed by action. Ilm and amal always go hand in hand. And that is why the three letters are the same. Ayn, lam, mim, ayn, mim, lam. The two go hand in hand. They're supposed to be intrinsically linked to one another, because they are and they should be the same thing. When you know, you act, and you should not act without knowledge. The two go hand in hand. The point being that when it comes to raising children, once again, you should have this attitude. I have to play an active role. I'm not just a passive income earner. I have to play an active role in the lives of these children. Intention, knowledge, and then action. That is rule or suggestion or advice number 2. Number 3, suggestion or advice number 3, and in fact, if there were any rules, this would be the rule. But there are no rules because it's not a guarantee. Nonetheless, if there were rules, number 3 would definitely be a rule. And that is, lead by example, not by lecture. Lead by example, not by lecturing. Parents, you want your children to be righteous? You had better be righteous in your own life. You want your children to be well-mannered? You had better demonstrate what it means to be well-mannered. You want your children to be productive, useful, loving Allah and His Messenger? Well then you had better show what it means to do that. Do not ever presume that throwing your kids in an hour of Quran school or in a weekend Sunday school is going to save them. Not at all. This is one of the biggest mistakes that parents make. What can a Maulana Sahib or an Islamic school do for 1 or 2 hours when for the rest of the 23 hours they see you and that is what they absorb? Sometimes people come to me and astaghfirullah, they place me in a pedestal above what I deserve. I am a human being. I am a sinful person. I have my sins, you have your sins. Don't put me in a pedestal above what I deserve. If there is any good in me, it is because Allah blessed me with 2 amazing parents. All that I am here today, it is because Allah blessed me with 2 amazing parents. My father, now alhamdulillah 85 years old, alhamdulillah. My father has always been active with Islamic causes. He's not a scholar. He's not a religious sheikh or an alim. He has not even memorized the Quran. But since his childhood, he's always been involved with causes that are of a noble nature. He came to America as a young single student back in 61, 62, when there were no Muslims in the country. America is a different story than England. You guys, the migration began after World War II. In America, migration actually began in the early 70s. My father came when there's hardly any Muslim there. Just a handful of Muslims. And at that time, he founded what is the ISOC, or the MSA. He's the founder of the MSA in Texas. And within a few years, when my brother was born, he founded the first masjid in Texas, which is now, alhamdulillah, the largest in Houston. The first masjid, he founded it. This is my father, always been active his entire life. Anybody who knows my father knows him. That he's been always doing something for the community. Even though he's not a sheikh, his PhD is in pathology and in medical sciences, whatnot. But he's somebody that has always loved Allah and His Messenger. My mother, subhanAllah, again, just the memory that I have always, my mother is a person who, whenever you say Ammi, I call her Ammi. Whenever you say Ammi or Ummi, I think of my mother in the sofa corner with the Quran open, reading the Quran. That's what lady she is, always reading the Quran. Her copy of the Quran is completely just worn and whatnot, and that's the Quran she loves to read. Now, in this environment, right, neither of my parents said, you have to go study overseas. No, that didn't come from them. Not at all. Honestly, when I was growing up, I had no idea that I would go and study Islam. But what's going to happen when the child is being raised in such a household? What's going to happen? What's going to happen when the father is always being actively involved with the masjid, founding the first masjid, being involved in da'wah, giving free Qur'ans to non-Muslims, bringing non-Muslims to our house and talking to them about Islam? These are my memories as a child. Always giving da'wah, hundreds of people converting, constantly being involved with the new converts. That was his niche. He loved to be the fatherly figure to the new converts, right? They needed a family, he would say, I am your family, come. And I would be irritated as a teenager, because I'd come home, usually there would be some non-Muslim couple or a lady or a gentleman, and just sitting there, and it ruins my day basically, right? I don't have time can't watch the TV. Back then there was one TV at the house, right? Remember there were 3 channels or 4 channels? We're talking about the 80s here. Our kids have no clue that once upon a time there were only 3 or 4 channels. And for them, the constant thing is there. And there was no internet as well, can you believe? In fact, there wasn't even a computer in the 80s. Anyway, so my point being that I grew up irritated at the da'wah of my father, right? That's what a teenager is going to do. But what's going to happen when you become older? Lead by example. Lead by your own character. And again, just a personal anecdote, just to demonstrate the power of custom, the power of habit. What happens when you lead by example? I give you again a personal anecdote that even I was shocked when I saw the impact of my father on me in this regard. That growing up, I was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s and 90s in Texas, in Houston, went to engineering and then went to Medina in 1995. Now, throughout the 80s and 90s, living in my parents' house, my father had a habit. And that habit was Salat al-Maghrib, we prayed together as a family. As far back as literally when I was a 4-year-old kid, my first memories, we have one room in our house, small room, it's a prayer room. And that's where we would pray Salat al-Maghrib, no matter rain or rain or not sunshine, but whatever, you get the point here. Whether they're guests, whether it doesn't matter. If I have an exam the next day, doesn't matter. We have to stop everything and we have to come to the salah room and pray Salat al-Maghrib. Even if there were non-Muslims, he would tell them, we have to 5 minutes pray and then we'll come back. Well, no matter what I said, I would have to pray Maghrib with the family. He would lead, my brother and I, and my mother in the back. That's our family. 1995, I got accepted to Medina. Alhamdulillah, thumma alhamdulillah, I spent 10 solid years in Medina. And I say this not as a bragging or boasting, but it is a statement of fact demonstrating how much I missed that city. From 1995 to 2005, 10 solid years. If I wasn't traveling or sick, I prayed Maghrib and Isha in the Haram without exception. Without exception. 10 solid years. If I wasn't traveling or sick, you travel, you're not in the city, you're sick, you're lying in bed. If I have an exam, it doesn't matter. Maghrib and Isha, it was my habit to pray in the masjid of the Prophet. Some sweet years, beautiful years for me, and I missed those years. My point is, 95 to 2005, I'm praying Maghrib there. 2005, I get accepted to my PhD, and that's in a small little village called New Haven, Connecticut, where Yale University is. And I moved to America after 10 years of praying in the Haram. Moved to America. At this stage of my life, I have 3 children. My youngest is going to be born after this, 2005 when I came back. The oldest of them is 5 years old. And then little Yusuf was 3 at the time, little Zainab was a baby. 10 years have gone by. I come back to New Haven. And come Maghrib time, I felt an itch inside of me. I felt something missing. And I said, you know what? Even though my eldest Ammar is 5 years old, maybe I should also start praying Maghrib and have him pray behind me. And from 2005, and it is now 2019, if I am at home, my family comes together and we pray Maghrib together as a family. Where did this come from? How did that happen? My father didn't sit down and tell me, Bete, when you grow up, you have kids, you're going to pray. It didn't happen. But it's something inside. To this day, day after tomorrow, inshallah, I'll be back home in Dallas now I live. To this day, when it comes Maghrib, I have 3 teenagers, by the way. This white hair now, those 3 little kids are now teenagers. That white hair is because of them. Yes, I have to yell to this day. Yes, I have to say, come on, it's time, we're waiting for you. Believe me, it doesn't matter who I am, my kids are teenagers, and teenagers are teenagers anywhere in the world. Okay? To bring them together to pray salah for 3 rak'ah brings 30 minutes. Well, exaggeration. You get my point here. But I do it. Why do I do it? Where did it come from? The habit of my parents. See, this is what I'm saying here. Lead by example. You want your children to do something? Demonstrate. Demonstrate, not just a one-off. Make it your character, make it your lifestyle, make it something that is a part and parcel of who you are. And then automatically, through osmosis, your child will absorb those values. This is human nature. This is human nature. When they grow up, when they have children, they've seen a successful parent in you. What are they going to do? They will replicate that example. And subhanAllah, there are so many cases I have seen with my own eyes. With my own eyes, that it is true, a lot of times, young men and women, 19, 20, 21, 22, they veer right and left, they do things they shouldn't do. It is true. You're at the pinnacle of your beauty, your manhood, and shaitan can cause many people to slip at that age. May Allah forgive and guide all of us and our children. But I have seen plenty of times where those children have slipped, and you think, khalas, they're gone. But then, another 5 years, another 10 years go by. They have their own children. They get married, they have their own children. And all of a sudden, the same person that you never saw in the masjid starts volunteering in the masjid. Why? Because his father, mother was the volunteer in the masjid. Because that's what they know to be a successful family. And when they have a family, when they have a child they're holding, all of a sudden they realize, hey, I can't be that lifestyle anymore. And they have to change. What will they change to? They're going to change to the lifestyle that they grew up with. So, you want your children to be good. You had better embody what that goodness is. And that's why I advise myself and all of you that whenever you're having a bad interaction with your son or daughter, you have to rebuke them, you have to discipline them. Whenever they do a mistake, and they will make a mistake, remember, however you interact on that day, on that time frame, it's not just the battle of that day. It's not just the mistake of today. However you deal with the mistake of today, your son or daughter, when they become your age, will deal with your grandchildren's mistake in the same manner. When you're long gone from this earth, your son or daughter as an old man or a woman will remember you and remember what you did and make a sincere dua for you. Never be so short-sighted that you're only thinking of today's mistake. How you interact with your child, and I see this in my own way that I interact with my own children. Alhamdulillah, I'll be honest with you, my father never once raised his hand against us. He never physically disciplined us in a time from in the 80s where everybody's getting tappars left, right, and center, right? But my father, alhamdulillah, he was a very different character, very different. And he never physically disciplined. And I see myself and the way that I have raised my kids as well. That's not the way that I'm going to do that in my own children's sake. It's embodied. And by the way, the opposite is true. Negative stereotypes, negative role models also has that negative impact. And there's a statistic that is actually a little bit strange when I first read it. It kind of struck me, and then I thought about it and said, of course, this is completely common sense. And that statistic is that I think around 65% of husbands who abuse their wives, and footnote here, by the way, Aisha radiallahu anha said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never once, actually she swore, wallahi, qasam, he never once raised his hand against a servant, against a lady, against a child in his whole life. He never once raised his hand. In a society where physically hitting your wife was rampant, our Prophet ﷺ went against the grain, and he did not do it once in his life. So pay attention to this, oh husbands. You can't claim to love the Prophet ﷺ and then go against his sunnah. Anyway, back to my statistic. There was a survey done, 65% of people who physically abuse their wives, they come from families where their own fathers abuse their mothers. Now, I read that and initially I was shocked. Like, hold on a sec. I would think the opposite should be true. I mean, I speak to the men here. Men, when you were a teenager, suppose if your father is beating your mother, whose side are you going to take as a 14-year-old? Tell me. Mother's side. Immediately, you're going to take your mother's side. As a 14-year-old, if your mother is being shouted, or even more than this, psychologically, maybe even physically, you're going to stand up and say, hey, this is my mother. Your heart is going to go to your mother. Now, if at the age of 14, you would think the heart would go to the mother, why at the age of 34 will that same 14-year-old teenager become a wife abuser? Because, obviously, he is replicating what he saw, right? That's what he has seen a man does when a man gets angry. And so he does what he has seen growing up. Even if his tongue will deny it later on and say, oh, I shouldn't do that. Or he'll tell you in public, yes, I come from an abusive family. I know the dangers of being abusive. He might himself do that. So parents, realize your akhlaq will rub down on your children. Be careful. There are repercussions. And they're positive and negative. If you're good, positive repercussions. And if you're bad, the opposite. So, rule number 3, and this is a rule, lead by example. Number 4, realize that the Sharia, well, the advice is as follows. The rule or the advice is as follows. Treat your young men and women as young men and women and not as infants. You see, our Western society, it has something called teenage years. And teenage years are a very awkward years. Why? Because mentally and emotionally, this young man or woman is ready to become a man or woman. Mentally and emotionally, this young man or woman, I'm talking about 13, 14, 15, teenage years, right? And that's why, by the way, the Sharia, when do you become an adult? When do you become an adult in the Sharia? Who can tell me? At the onset of puberty. That's when you become an adult. 13, 14, 15, right? The Sharia considers you to be an adult. Essentially, 15 is the very max. You are an adult. Our society has taught us that this 13 to 17 age frame, your body is a man or a woman, but you're supposed to be treated like an infant. And the Sharia doesn't want that. My suggestion to all of you is, don't treat your 13-year-old like a 3-year-old. Start learning to deal with them as young adults. Give them bit by bit more and more responsibility. Groom them to become fully acclimatized to being a man or woman. They're not just going to wake up at the age of 18 or 19 and be ready for life. It's your job in these sensitive years to slowly and surely give them more and more responsibilities, knowing full well that they're going to fail some of those responsibilities. That's your job, to train them. A novice, a new initiate on the job, you don't expect them to program like the top-notch programmer. You expect them to fail. That's why you hired them at a lower pay. Everything is going to take a while. Same with your 13-year-old child. Give them small responsibilities. If they fall, if they make a mistake, make sure that they understand and learn, and then keep on increasing their responsibility. And this is something we can derive from the Quran and from the Sunnah. Of them, for example, this much longer series of verses, وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَى, that test these young orphans. Allah is saying, it's a long tafsir of it, but basically our scholars say that a young child who doesn't have a parent, and you have their wealth, you're waiting for to give it to the child, you have to test when that young boy and that young girl is able to receive it. And how do you test? By increasingly giving responsibilities, bit by bit. And when they pass one, give them a bigger. When they pass that, give them a bigger. If they make a mistake, make sure they learn, do it again. If they pass, then move on. Keep on testing the child, Allah is saying. Until they become proper age to get married, then Allah says, when you find them to be wise, give them their wealth that you have been safeguarding. This is for the orphans. Now the concept is even for our own children. Keep on testing the child. Keep on treating the child as a young man or woman until they become a young man or woman. And of course, the Quran and Sunnah is full of examples like this. The most famous example, Ibrahim and Ismail. The famous, dream that Ibrahim and Ismail saw. Ibrahim alayhi salam saw that he sacrificed Ismail, as you know. And Ismail at the time was barely, 13 years old, 12 years old? And Ibrahim has a frank, adult conversation with him. Oh my son, I've seen a dream that Allah has shown me such and such. What do you think I should do? And the son says, my dear father, my father, if Allah has told you to do it, then we have to do it. Ibrahim didn't need to have a conversation with Ismail. He would have done it anyway. But this is how you are training your son. Look at Luqman and his son in the Quran. Read that story of Luqman in the Quran. It's the Surah Luqman. The second page is a whole advice. It's very profound advice, even though the son of Luqman is a young child, maybe 12, 13 at the time. And again, many more examples can be given. But this rule is very simple, dear brothers. It's very simple. Don't infantilize teenagers. Don't treat teenagers like infants. Treat them like young men and women and open up to them. Be frank with them. When the child is 3, you can say, because I say so, you have to do it. Good enough. When the child is 13, even though you have that authority, don't just say, because I say so. Explain, rationalize, contextualize, and slowly but surely, as they become older, they will themselves become more mature. And here I give another word of advice to parents here. These days, dear parents, it is my humble suggestion, take it or leave it. I could be wrong, I could be wrong. I grew up, as I said, in the 80s, and my parents were old school. Ultimate respect. There's no friendship per se, it's ultimate respect. And that's great, I have no problem with that. Dare I say though, I believe that needs to change for our time and place. There has to be a level of friendship for your teenage son or daughter. You have to be able to converse with them about more than just father, mother, or daughter, son, more than that. About the world, about life. Why? Because when they mess up, when they slip, and they will slip, when they make a mistake, and they will make a mistake, if they don't feel comfortable coming to you for help, for guidance, for support, they're going to go to somebody else. And you and I both know, no matter what they've done, no one can protect them better than we can. You know that. But if they don't know that at the age of 15, at the age of 17, if they don't trust their own parents, and they're going to go to some ajnabi, some stranger, for advice, subhanAllah, that's not a good relationship. So my humble suggestion, we do need to have frank rapport with our children, even if perhaps our parents didn't have that with us. It was a different time and place. And also, by the way, a footnote here, that look, parents, don't be so harsh on your children that you lose track of the society that your children are in. I mean, I grew up at a time when there were no computers, much less internet. I didn't have a computer until I was 13, 14 years old. There was no computer in the early 80s, you all know, right? Internet came out when I was graduating from university. My entire uni years, there was no internet. Didn't exist. Mozilla, Firefox, whatever, Mozilla came out back in 94 or something. There was no internet. These days, kids have cell phones, iPhones, Instagram, Facebook, this and that. You and I, growing up before this generation, we made our slips, we made our mistakes. Frank question, what would you have done if you had Instagram? What mistakes would you have made if you had Facebook? How far would you have strayed if you had access to a phone and the entire world at your fingertips? Cut them some slack. The world is no longer the world we grew up in. Your children are going to mess up. Didn't you do things your parents told you weren't supposed to do? All of us did. We're human beings. So your children as well are going to slip. And their slip-ups most likely will be bigger than yours. Not because they're any worse than you, but it's because the potential society has given them. So cut them some slack, even as you have to reel them back in and guide them. Challenges, different challenges of our times. But realize this is our responsibility. Leads me to my fifth point. My fifth point, and especially to fathers here. This is in particular to fathers, even though it applies to mothers as well.
No.
Most of us who are the primary earners, whoever is the primary earner, it applies to them. Most of us who are primary earners, there will come a point in your life where you have the potential. There's going to be a fork in the road. There's going to be a fork in the road. You can turn one way and give more time to your career, and that will give you more income, but it will come at the expense of time for your children. Or you can turn back on that raise. You can turn back on that promotion. You can turn back on that extra effort and not get that money, but spend more time with the kids. When that fork comes, I'm not telling you which way to go, by the way. I'm saying, think long and hard. What are your priorities? Because surely, I agree fully, when you don't have children and you're not even married at that stage, you want to amass as much as you can. Give your 90, 100%, whatnot. Maybe even the early years of marriage, okay, it's easier to do. But there comes a point in time when the 10,000 pounds extra a year that you earn is not worth the 2 hours a day you lose with your child. You need to decide that I can't for you. There comes a point in time where that extra effort and that extra money is only going to be literally the icing on the cake. And your son or daughter needs you more than that icing on the cake. Only you can decide when that stage is. Only you can decide the pros and cons. All I'm saying, time is more precious than money for a child. And for you to be a positive influence, you have to be physically present in the life of your child. Our Prophet ﷺ said, beautiful hadith, every matter in which the dhikr of Allah is absent, there's no dhikr, there's no Quran, no dua, no bismillah, every matter in which there's no dhikr is batil. Batil means waste of time. He didn't say haram. Haram would be total, that would be, subhanAllah, we couldn't live like this. Batil means it's a waste of time. There's no benefit in it. Let's be brutally honest. We sit down, we watch TV, there's no benefit in it. It's batil. And it is not haram, it's not halal, it's just batil, you're just wasting time. Every matter in which there's no dhikr of Allah is batil, is lahu, except for four. Four things, even if there's no dhikr of Allah, they are blessed. One of them, a man playing with his family. مُلَاعَبَةُ الرَّجُلِ أَهْلَهُ مُلَاعَبَ لَعِبْ. Playing. A man playing with his family. Just chilling, relaxing, going for a picnic. The Prophet embracing Aisha, as he did in the hadith of Sahih Bukhari. A man playing with his family. This is important. Why? Because the presence of the father and the mother is a very, very necessary part of the tarbiyah of the child. And that's why I advise myself and all of you, just being there. You know, these days, as you know, they're redefining family, if you understand what I'm saying here, right? And so, a group of psychologists who want to affirm the old school definition of family, they are now, doing research and papers, and there was one just released literally 2 weeks ago, which basically said that a positive male influence and female influence is needed for the emotional intelligence of the average child. You need a positive role model mother and a positive role model father to make the child well-rounded, understand how to cope with society. Now that's a psychologist study that was done for another reason. We can apply it here. There should be a presence in the life of the child of both of the parents. My sixth point, and I only have 7 points that I'm done. My sixth point, the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child, right? And it's a very true saying. Just 2 people to raise a child is very difficult. You need a broader influence. You need help. What should you do? Look at your family and friends. Look at your social infrastructure. Look at your mini community that you are surrounding yourself with. And see, are these going to be a positive influence on my children or not? Because birds of a feather flock together. Because, as our Prophet ﷺ said, a person follows the religion of his friends. So be careful who your friends are. You want your children to be good Muslims, positive role models? The people you invite to your house for dinners, for da'wats, for meals. The families you associate with. The communities that you interact with.